is here to give a presentation on, you know that area around the Harrison Crawford Forestry? Well, I think it's an amazing area, and I always wondered, what's the history? Who settled it? How did things grow and develop in that area? How did it come to be how it is? Well, we have the world expert right here. And although it's interesting because Ann grew up in Akron, Ohio, right? Now, why would Ann come back here? Because you had grandparents that lived on a farm in that area, and she may tell us a little bit more about that, but she spent a fair amount of time down here in this area. And grandmother that lived to be 102 years old? Mm-hmm. Okay, I like the idea of that.
I know her.
Well, Ann has written books. Her book here about the area is up here for you to peruse. We've got a copy here in the Historical Society. And so without any further ado, I'm going to turn the time over to Ann to tell us all about this area, this part of ours.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Oh, Ann, a bottle of water there.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, before I forget, my grandmother, Elsie Smoots, she was best friends with a woman you all know, Nellie Adams from Leavenworth. They went to high school together. You remember Nellie?
I do.
Okay.
She taught a lot of kids piano.
Yeah. Yeah, the way I got so interested in the history of the Harrison Crawford State Forest and what used to be Scott Township is that I grew up in boring old suburbia. We had quite a cushy little life, but we'd come down here to visit my grandparents on the farm, and they were living kind of like pioneers, and it was just so exotic and different. My brothers and I just loved it down here, and it became kind of a mystical, magical place for me, and I got very interested in all the old home sites and buildings and people of Scott Township. Scott Township is no more. They did away with that township, the westernmost township of Harrison County, when they created the Harrison Crawford State Forest. There just wasn't enough people left there. So I wrote this little book here about 2009. It's practically impossible to read. The print is so small, and I'm looking into getting it reprinted perhaps. I don't know. I'm not sure there's anybody out there that's still alive that remembers a lot of this stuff, even be interested in it. So I don't know what to do exactly. I just hate having a book that nobody can read. Whoops. Yes, there's the book. I didn't get it published, I got it printed. And here's my grandparents on their farm in Scott Township back in the 1950s. Richard and Elsie Smoots of Old Scott Township. Their farm is now part of the Harrison Crawford State Forest. And incidentally, it's right across the road from where Judy O'Bannon has her farm. Beautiful southern Indiana. I don't think that people are aware of how absolutely unchanged and unspoiled and how beautiful southern Indiana is. That was taken up there at the Wyandotte Cave Overlook. I'm not sure you can still get that kind of view from there. A lot of the information I got was from somebody that was in the Historical Society of Harrison County for a long, long time, Ola Kettner, which is why people need to write things down. I got a lot of information from Ola. She presented this paper back in 1960. Some of the early settlers to Scott Township, a lot of these people probably also are kind of common to Crawford County as well. And in case you're wondering what the map is for westernmost Harrison County, this is where it is defined. Blue River is on the west, Ohio River is on the south, and Blue River Township's up there on the north. Now, if you go walking around the forestry, you will run into a lot of old home sites and cemeteries and such. The Harrison Crawford State Forest got its start back in the early 1930s, and James Brewster, an Indiana state senator, was instrumental in getting it started. He started buying up a lot of land, him and his cronies, and maybe they were doing a little land speculation. They probably did make a profit, and he got the state to buy up this land, and it was going for something like $3-4 an acre, and that's how we got the forestry. The forestry is now 24,000 acres. Pretty big piece of property. Why were people selling their land? Well, that land down there is really hard to farm. It's pretty rocky, and it's pretty hilly. The soil's kind of thin, and that is Julius Slaughter back there, standing on his property, and you can just see it's totally infested with rocks. People were really desperate down there, particularly in the 30s. A lot of the land had been over-farmed, and a lot of the trees had been taken off. There was a lot of erosion. If any of you guys have been up to the state forestry and you go back towards the swimming pool, you'll see a service barn on the right as you go onto that road. That's what that land looked like back in 1932. It is now totally forested. I won't try to interpret this for you. It's just a list of all the original land holders in Scott Township and the farms that went first. The property that was bought first in Vincennes or Jeffersonville was the flat, good land. And people that end up on these little hillsides down by the Ohio River really had a tough time of it. Some of the geographical features of Scott Township, of course, Blue River, beautiful Blue River. Have any of you ever seen Blue River when it's actually blue like this? Aqua blue. I've been told it's because it has dissolved limestone in the water, and that's what creates that beautiful aqua blue. And then down on the Ohio River, which borders the southern part of Harrison Crawford State Forest in Old Scott Township, do any of you remember when the Ohio River Island was there?
Yes.
Okay, that was taken, that picture, back in 1958, and that island is now totally gone. It's gotten totally washed away by all the river traffic. A little bit about Native Americans in Scott Township. How many of you have found Indian artifacts on your property? I think just about everybody has a bunch of arrowheads. Is that not right? And I tried to donate our arrowheads to the Archaeological Museum up in Bloomington, and they didn't really want them. I guess they've got plenty. But from what I understand, there were never really any permanent Indian villages here. People think it was inhabited by the Wyandotte Indians, but from what I've learned, the Wyandottes actually lived up in central Ohio, and they may have come down here maybe to get the flint. I don't know. The flint here, you know, there's a good vein of flint that you can use to make arrowheads. I don't know why they are also found down here as well.
Yeah, they're an Ohio tribe, and then, you know, a lot of them, the Miami, the Shawnee, the Wyandotte, as civilization started pushing them westward, they all trailed through here, so.
These are some of the artifacts in our collection, and it breaks my heart. I just don't know what to do with these. I don't want to just hang on to them, and I don't have any children, and I think they should go someplace where they can be kept and such, but nobody wants them. Here's a couple of artifacts that were found in Scott Township. A raccoon bone fishhook and a hairpin with decorative etchings found now near Kendall's Landing. Kendall's Landing is down along the Ohio River. It's kind of hard to explain where it's at. It's near Cold Friday, and I'll talk about Cold Friday a little bit because it's got such a picturesque name. There's a woman by the name of, I think her name's Eileen Slaughterback, that lives up behind Wyandotte Cave.
It's Lorraine Salzgaver was, she's
Salzgaver.
Lorraine Oldham now, she's on her, got her third husband, she's 92 years old,
Yeah.
going strong, talked to her
Okay.
last night.
Lorraine Salzgiver, she gave me this picture to get a copy of. This is the chief of the Wyandottes. He visited Wyandotte Cave back in 1960. And he stated that contrary to popular belief, the Wyandottes had never lived in the area. Their chief village was near Upper Sandusky, Ohio. They and other tribes, notably the Seminoles, did come to Scott Township on regular hunting trips. This is probably the most remarkable of the Indian artifacts that my grandparents ever found. This is we always refer to as the Indian needle. It's about 9 inches long, and it's made out of quartzite, which is not found in this area. And evidently, I took this to the state archaeologist, and this quartzite comes from somewhere out west. You know, the Indians were trading different kinds of rocks across the continent. And my grandpa always used to say, oh yeah, the Indians used to use that to sew teepees with. But the archaeologist said this was never anything pragmatic. This was just used as a ceremonial effigy. It's meant to represent a claw. And that is something that really needs to be in a museum. Some of the natural features of Scott Township, and of course this is true of Perry County and Crawford County as well. Lots of limestone, lots of hills, beautiful Blue River. This is a picture of Blue River that appeared on the front cover of the old Louisville Courier-Journal magazine, showing its beautiful aqua color. That's down there around White Cloud. That used to be a big hangout, that White Cloud Dam.
How many years ago was that?
That was back in the 50s.
Okay.
This is Wyandotte Lake. When it was first created, I think back in the early 50s.
About 52.
52.
My dad took me down there when I was little, and I was born there, so he took me down there and I'd sit and watch the Stouth brothers and Daniel Sharp build it.
Okay.
That was very controversial with the Rothrops, when they built. Part of the corporation wanted it and part of them didn't, but they didn't want to go against FM.
Yeah, I think they built it in order to increase traffic to the cave,
They were
maybe.
trying, yeah.
There's another picture of people down there at Wyandotte Lake. There used to be a little post office log cabin down there that sold fishing supplies and snacks. That's Mary Bell Miller and her father, Robert Loudon, back in the early 50s down there. This is what that little post office looked like back in the 80s. It's now just, I think, a cement pad with a picnic table on it. Once again, that photograph that I showed you earlier, the Ohio River Islands, there's an upper, or there was, an upper and a lower Blue River Island. And this photograph, just about everybody in Crawford County had this on their wall at one time. It was taken in 1959 by H. Harold Davis, who was a photographer for the Louisville Courier-Journal. And the boat, a lot of people say that's the Belle of Louisville or the Delta Queen or whatever, but it's actually the Gordon C. Green. I had a guy that ran a steamboat museum or something identify that boat. And this is what that same scene looks like now. You see the double trunk oak tree on the far left. The island is totally gone.
It was there through the early nineties, cause I paddled out there and camped.
Yes, it was. We had a picnic on the island. As a matter of fact, here's the picture when we went out there for a picnic in 1992. This is a really cool cypress bog that was created by some of the foresters down at the Harrison Crawford State Forest. They kind of wanted to see if it was possible to grow cypress trees this far north, and they planted a ring of cypress trees where there was a boggy area. And sure enough, the cypress trees are still there some 70 years later, 80 years later. Another geographical feature that used to be talked about and hung out at a lot was Cap Rock in Scott Township. It's since fallen into Indian Creek. And of course, there's a lot of caves, just like in Crawford County, in westernmost Harrison County, the forestry. This is a really great picture that a couple cave explorers let me borrow. This is the Jug Hole Cave. And this is a map of all the various caves in the Harrison Crawford State Forestry. And of course, Wyandotte Cave, everybody knows about Wyandotte. Here's a picture of some people exploring Wyandotte caves back in the, I don't know, late 1900s?
I mean, late,
1800s,
about
I mean.
1899, right in there.
1899. You know, it used to be a really big deal. Wyandotte Cave was a major tourist attraction because there was nothing else to do. They didn't have all these amusement parks, and they didn't have the internet, and they didn't have cars. They didn't have anything like that. A picture of this relatively well-known rock formation in Wyandotte Cave called the Alligator, and everybody had to get their picture taken evidently on the alligator. This is a brochure, an early brochure of the caves. This is the third Wyandotte Cave Hotel, which was originally built around 1865, and it burned down in 1933. And in place of that Wyandotte Cave Hotel, they built this really nice rustic Wyandotte Cave Hotel. This was number 4, and it was built during the years 1933, 34, and then it burned also in 1955. And that cave hotel had a dining room. It was quite the destination, evidently. And then the last Wyandotte Cave Hotel, a lot of you probably remember, it was painted pink, I'm not sure why, and they tore it down about 20 years ago, maybe? Not that long. One of the little towns in Old Scott Township is White Cloud, Indiana. Have any of you been back to White Cloud? And that's beautiful downtown White Cloud, Indiana. It used to be the site of the old Rothrock Mill, William Rothrock Mill. There's a lot of Rothrocks with a lot of mills. And this is a picture taken by one of Indiana's most famous photographers, Frank Hohenberger. He used to travel around the state and just take pictures of everyday types of things in the late 20s, early 30s. That was down there at the Blue River Dam. This is William Rothrock. That's my great-great-grandfather. And my grandfather, Richard Smoots, this little boy, outside of the mill at White Cloud. And this is when White Cloud was actually a post office. You can see the post office over there on the left. And that's my grandfather and his mother. And that is the building that later became the infamous Blue River Inn. Any of you hear about the Blue River Inn? I'll talk a little bit about it. I wish I had grown up in an era where I could have gone to the Blue River Inn, because evidently we do have somebody here that has been to the Blue River Inn. One of the prettiest little buildings in White Cloud now is this old general store. It's Vic Rothrock's old general store and gas station, and the family continues to maintain it and keep it up. One of the other things I'm not sure people can remember about anymore, I just know of this through my grandfather, was when you go past Wyandotte Cave and Wyandotte Lake on 62 and you're traveling up that hill, on the left side of the hill, about maybe 1/3 of the way up, there's a little pull-off where all of 62 used to go, and that's where Happy Shack was. Happy Shack was a little shacky-like house where a man by the name of James Chambers used to live. He was divorced, and his place got to be the neighborhood hangout for all the men that wanted to get away from their wives. And they do a little drinking, a little card playing, and it got to be known as Happy Shack, and everybody called that hill Happy Shack Hill. I'm not sure how many people realize now, today, that's Happy Shack. Another place that you could possibly still see some ruins of is at Kendall's Landing. This is down on the Ohio River, and it's where a lot of people would take their produce and their hay to ship it off to New Orleans. It was a major distribution point at one time. There's a little cemetery down there. This is the old swinging bridge that used to go across Blue River just to the south of the Blue River Chapel, and that's some of the Shrigley family taking a coffin across in the old swinging bridge. There's actually a little place in Scott Township known of as Dixie, and it used to be known because it had a little store and a little post office, and I've actually got a postmark that says Dixie, Indiana. Another little geographical area in Scott Township was French Hill, and it was way down on the Ohio River, and it was established by a lot of French immigrants, and that's a picture of one of the French immigrants' homes there. I think that is one of the Pate homes. This is the Champs. It was the Pates and the Champs that lived down there. And they used to walk all the way to Frenchtown to go to some kind of French Catholic mass, I guess, there.
There's a Catholic church there, it's still good today.
Yeah. And evidently, it was settled by French people, and the people down there in French Hill used to go there. The Paul de Champs home, you can actually, as you're hiking around the forestry, if you're on the Adventure hiking trail, which is about 24 miles long or something, I think. This chimney that you see here on this house, and that's in about 1910 maybe, it's still there. And forestry has used it to provide a place for overnight campers to get warmed up. Do any of you remember when the St. Meinrad Arch Abbey had a camp down in Blue River? A few of you? Yeah, this was located at the base of Greenbrier Hill on Blue River. They had a really nice camp. It was called Camp Benedict. And these are some of the pictures of what it looked like in its heyday back in the 1950s. This is what the building looked like back in the 1950s. And this is what it looked like when I hiked back there. It's just kind of been left to ruin, unfortunately. That was back in its heyday.
That one was the little chapel.
Yeah, they have a little chapel, but I'm not sure that's the little chapel.
The one to the left is.
Okay, I see the little.
Beautiful, beautiful inside. I've got
Okay.
photos of it from the inside. And
Do ya? They still have a rope up on a sycamore tree over the river that kids used to swing out onto. This slide here is really interesting. One of the original inhabitants of the Cold Friday area drew this map of how he remembered the area as a child. And he has things like, we used to catch rabbits and sell them to the pack peddler in this field, and that kind of thing. I have a big map like this, like a blow up of it that I donated to the Harrison County Library. How did Cold Friday get its name? Well, there's this mysterious area in Scott Township, way down at the end of Cold Friday Road in the forestry, and there's all sorts of legends about how it ever got such a peculiar name as Cold Friday. The most common one of the legends is that somebody froze to death there on a Friday. But there's still a Cold Friday cemetery, and there was a Cold Friday church and a Cold Friday school. These are some of the post offices that were once in Scott Township. We've got the Idlewild Post Office, that's up near the entrance to the forestry. That little area there was known of as Idlewild. And that's why the little Idlewild Post restaurant is called such. There is a little town called Worth, a little town called Dixie, which I've showed you. Of course, Wyandotte Cave had its own post office, and then White Cloud, Indiana had its own post office. And this is a picture of the Wyandotte Post Office. It stayed in business up until the mid-1960s. That's my great Aunt Ruth. No, that's not Aunt Ruth. I'm not sure who that
that's
is.
Lola Cyber.
Lola Cyber.
Lola took care of Aunt Ruth when health got bad, and she helped her there at the post office a lot.
Okay. And that's located right at the corner of Wyandotte Cave Road and 62. You'll notice there's a little pull off there, and there's two stone pillars. And this is, once again, a picture of the Dixie Post Office and General Store. And the owners, Ed and Lou Sterrick, had a peddling wagon. And then this, I've showed you already, that's the White Cloud Post Office. And this is what is the Idlewild Post Office with Annie Bruner Brown sitting here in the rocking chair. A lot of those Brown sisters were school teachers, and they would edit and help people write letters because a lot of people had trouble with grammar, evidently, and these were all school teachers. And this is where the Brown house was, what it looked like with a little post office in the back of the house. And that's pretty much right across the street from where the Idlewild Post restaurant is. Some of the churches in the area, of course, we have the Blue River Chapel, which still stands, and people are still going to church there. The Blue River Chapel was built back in the late 1800s on land donated by James and Lydia Shrigley. And here is a picture of the congregation in 1915. There's also a church in the middle of the forestry called Potato Run Chapel, and this is a beautiful watercolor that somebody did of Potato Run Chapel. And people are still going to church there too. This is an old church that's no longer standing, Brown's Chapel, I believe it was called. There's still a Brown cemetery nearby. Mount Solomon Church. It's the oldest, or it was the oldest, Lutheran church in Indiana. And then we had Luther's Chapel Church was another church in Scott Township that was German in origin, and they had two different entrances, one for men, one for women. There's the old Cold Friday Church before it was torn down in 1957. Some of the cemeteries in Scott Township, we have the Crecilius Cemetery. This is the grave of Julia and Samuel Kessner. They had 5 children, all buried here, all died before the age of 10. That is Greenbrier Cemetery. That's got some of the oldest graves in Scott Township. We've been out trying to find this cemetery, never could. It was called Swan Cemetery. Looked all over the place. It's down along the Ohio River, up on a knoll. Never could find it. The Sharp Family Cemetery, which is near the Iron Bridge up on the hill a little bit. Forestry or the cemetery restoration people actually recently cleared it out. It looks really nice. It's got a lot of mature cedar trees around it. The Grayville Cemetery, which is off Walnut Valley Road. Of course, Potato Run Cemetery right there next to the Potato Run Church. That is home of the grave of John Green, which was one of the most infamous murders that happened in Scott Township. John Green was a widower. He married a younger woman, and they were both found dead. She had been bludgeoned, and he had hung himself in the barn. And the stories about what happened just went wild. This was back in the 1930s, I believe. 1922, actually. This is the Rothrock Cemetery, across the road from where the old Rothrock Hotel and Home are, which is still standing. This is the Luther's Chapel Cemetery. Ray's Chapel Cemetery, which is up next to the entrance of the campground at the Harrison Crawford State Forest. And one of the famous people, if you will, that's buried at Ray's Chapel is the grave of Isaac Lang. Isaac Lang was a rather large man that got very excited when Morgan's Raiders came through, and he went running around telling all his neighbors that Morgan's Raiders were on their way, and he died of a heart attack. The Cold Friday Cemetery, you can see in the background, I'm pretty sure those hills are across the river over Kentucky. And if you were to go there now, it is totally grown up. Oh yeah, here you go. Here's a picture of what that same view looks like in the modern era. Blue River Chapel. Another cemetery that's on private land is the Klein Family Cemetery, showing a fresh grave with flowers on it. The Hoddle Cemetery is one of the oldest cemeteries. It's on Feller Road. A lot of just plain old stones for markers. Some of the schools that were in Scott Township, the Pleasant View School. That's my grandmother holding the slate saying it's 1900 to 1901 school year. Oops, wrong way. The Cold Friday School. The White Cloud School in 1917. The Potato Run School. There used to be a schoolhouse associated with Potato Run Church. The Precinct School, which is up near the entrance to the forestry. It got to be known as this Precinct School because that's where everybody went to vote. And there were some pretty wild elections there because before women got the right to vote, election day was the day that the men would have a chance to not have to work, get together, play cards, do a little drinking, do a little gambling, and there was actually a few gunfights there. And they didn't want women to get the vote because they had to start behaving themselves, and they no longer had the vacation day, as it were. But that is the Harrison County Historical Society visiting the old precinct school back in 1954. The state did end up tearing it down.
They promised to keep it up when they got it.
Did they?
Yeah, and
Yeah.
they couldn't keep up with it.
This is a school program from the precinct school, just to prove that it really was called the precinct. This is a really great old place. This is the old Fox Hollow School. Have any of you ever hiked back into Fox Hollow? Do you know where it's at? If you go over the hill from the fire tower, there's this big expanse of flat bottomland, many acres, and that's Fox Hollow. Nobody lives there anymore, and there's just a few ruins of this school and the Roth Rock chimneys, which I'll talk to you about later. But that's the Fox Hollow School, what it looked like in its heyday, 1912 to 1914. Here's an actual little program that one of the school teachers, I believe it was Nellie Brown, one of the Brown sisters, gave to all her students as a little souvenir back in 1909, and that has all the students' names in it. And this is what the Fox Hollow Schoolhouse looks like today. You can go down there, and if you know where to look, you'll find the foundation. The Bark Schoolhouse, another schoolhouse. A little bit about Scott Township roads and bridges. This, I happen to be lucky enough to have. My great-great-grandfather, or maybe it was my great-great-great-grandfather, William Rothrock, he kept this ledger of all his neighbors and how many days each one of them had worked on the roads. Because evidently, you could get out of paying a portion of your taxes if you donated some time to work maintaining the roads. So that is from like 1858. This is what the bridge over Blue River up to the forestry looked like when they were rebuilding it around 1960. And that's what the entranceway and the bridge look like today. How many of you been to what I refer to as the Iron Bridge? The Iron Bridge is this abandoned bridge that used to take you up to the forestry the back way. And it's off 62. It's where people can get out of their canoes. It's a canoe stopping point. And it's not had a floor in it for years. But this is what it used to look like. It was known as Cole's Ford. And that is some of the Stevenson family and the Stoner family. I think the Breedens had a hatchery there at one time.
Dad worked there.
Your dad worked there.
That, Iron Bridge you're talking about, the Harrison County side of it, that bridge on that section of the steel structure was moved down from 462 down there.
Okay, that's where the old bridge went.
Yeah, your bridge where you all went in all the time up at 462 where everybody goes in, they moved it down there and put it back up and
Connected it to another bridge. It's actually
connected
two
it to the
bridges.
one that was there, through the other truss.
Mhm.
And I got to talk to 2 or 3 of the people that worked on it when they moved it and reset it, and
That was quite an operation.
it was.
Some of the old homes, the pioneer homes that I happen to have pictures of Scott Township, this was the Brown family. They had one of the nicer homes in the area. There's the Brown home up there across from the Ottawa Post. That was always a big landmark. It was a beautiful home. It had this big pine tree in the front yard. Then another landmark home that some of you, I'm thinking maybe David, had been to before. That's the old Sharp home
I've been in it.
back behind Wyandotte Cave or Wyandotte Lake. And it was 3 stories high, was it not?
Pardon?
It was 3 stories high, wasn't
Yeah,
it?
at least 2.5, you know, the upstairs, the very upper section, the third section wasn't full, you know what I mean? It was originally the Cybert, and then the Sharps completely rebuilt it about 1890s,
Uh-huh.
big logs. It was a fine home.
It's too bad it's been torn down. That's what it looked like when the state was tearing it down, back about 1971. You can see how enormous it was.
It had sat vacant from 57, I believe, to 71, they started tearing it down.
And then, this is what remains of the, Hannells. The Hannells had this beautiful foundation for their home that, is where the cattle or the cow and maybe some pigs would stay overnight to keep them safe. And then the home was on top of it. And those ruins are still there. The Hannells were stonemasons, from what I understand. A lot of their foundations are just beautiful. Some of you may remember this. This is the Hockman home. And this picture was taken by, what's his name?
Yeah.
Frank Hohenberger, back in 1928. Do you remember this home? It was on the south side of 62, in between where Wyandotte Cave and Leavenworth are, right next to the Iron Bridge. It was a beautiful.
Davy Cole home.
Davy Cole built it, but then the Hockmans lived in it.
Dave Hockman,
And it was torn down by the state. And then this is the Rothrock chimneys. William Rothrock built this enormous home down in Fox Hollow back about 1862. The stonemason was reportedly a itinerant stonemason by the name of Manny Good. And you can still go down there. There's a full basement, all these beautiful rocks that have been fitted together, and the 2 stone chimneys. And this is what the Rothrock home looked like, instead of twin chimneys, back in the 50s before it was torn down. That's another picture of it. The last family that lived there was the Smith family. And Woody Smith gave me that picture. This is a beautiful log house that still is standing in Old Scott Township. It was part of the Davis family, the Cornelius family, I'm sorry. And it's still standing, but for whatever reason, the people that own it, they are part of the Cornelius clan, they covered it over. And I think maybe the logs were in bad shape or something, they wanted to preserve it. They did a nice job, but it's kind of sad. And then David, this is the picture I was asking you about. This little shacky-like house, this picture was taken by Frank Hohenberger back in 1928, August the 9th, 1928. That is the road that goes up to Wyandotte Cave Hotel. And you think you remember who used to live there?
that was a Lynch home, but do you know they're right at, where Kenny Harper's place and Bob Loudon's place matched up, the property lines, they're crossing the road that went back to the Catholic camp.
Uh-huh.
There's a road went up over the hill there and came out up by Cox's, up by the Wyandotte bridges over the interstate. And that house was on that road.
Okay.
You had Frank Lynch there and 2 more. I've got it, I did write it all down. I went to Lorraine about this, and then I went to Donnie Dale. Cause that was would have been his uncle that lived in that old house.
Well, that is a little slice of history that got preserved, that's for sure.
Yeah, it's nice.
And then the Binkleys, their little cabin is still standing too. That's Carl and Leona Binkley. They raised 10 kids, in this little log cabin back in the Cold Friday area. That's the log home of the Gibson family down around Cold Friday. A little bit about Heinz Raid. Heinz Raid took place in 1863, and when he came through Leavenworth, I guess he got waylaid or chased up the river a little bit and ended up crossing or trying to cross back into Kentucky there in Old Scott Township. And the island that they tried to find refuge on was this Upper Blue River Island, which no longer stands, because the Leavenworth Home Guards were so rough and tough that they chased them up there. They couldn't cross at Leavenworth.
Took an old took a rifle barrel cannon up there on a steamboat called the Izetta.
That's right.
Fired about 2 shots over on to the island where then they gave up. Except Heinz and a couple of these, they swam and got away, but the rest of them they brought back to Leavenworth.
One of the things that the president of the Harrison County Historical Society has written about is the phenomenon of the Whitecaps, which was a vigilante group that was around in the late 1800s. And a lot of action occurred at Scott Township. One of the first incidents was when the Whitecaps decided that James Keene, a resident of Scott Township, had been stealing potatoes from his neighbors, and they whipped him. They tied him to a tree and they whipped him. Some of the social activities of the old hills and hollers of Scott Township, a lot of guys would go what's known as fox hunting. Are there still guys here in Crawford County that go fox hunting? No. You just get your beagles or whatever dog that likes to run out and let them go after a fox. And the foxes actually like to be run. On my grandfather's farm, there was a little fox that would actually come out at dusk on top of the hill above the farm and start barking like, okay dogs, let's go. And the fox would always win. They were so smart, they would think of all these ways to throw the hounds off their trail. And that was a big activity for the guys. That's the Gib Heischman fox hunting. Packet boat excursion. This is an excursion boat that went from New Albany down to Leavenworth. The Homer Smith, you could ride that. Back in 1915, it was a moonlight excursion. Pie suppers were a big social event. And when people got married, back in my grandmother's day, they were still having chivarees, where the night that a newlywed couple is together, all their neighbors would get together and start banging pots and pans and making a lot of racket and trying to disturb them and get them up out of bed and come down and entertain them. This is a poster of a big picnic that took place down in Cold Friday back in 1892. They had a band, they had all sorts of refreshments, Hoddle String Band. Some of the businesses and industries of Old Scott Township, of course you had the pack peddlers. That's Ed Sterrett that had the pack peddler out of Dixie, Indiana. Of course, a lot of people farming. That's Julius and Eileen Slaughterback on their farm making hay, probably about 1940s. And Ora Breeden, he's a blacksmith in the neighborhood. Marion Cunningham had a little store, a little country store up there on the Ridge Road. A lot of you probably remember this building. This is an old gas station that stood up till about 20 years ago. The Strodkurt's gas station is a very unusual little octagonal cement building or stucco building there near the bridge that goes over Blue River on 462. Do you remember that? it just kind of fell into ruin, but it took a long time. Those, Kurtz brothers built that themselves. They never built a building by themselves before. They just made it out like chicken wire and plaster or something.
Is that the one that went down the old Leavenworth?
No, it's, in between Leavenworth and, Corrigan. There was a couple of guys that used to make chairs in Old Scott Township back in the 1800s, the Lehman brothers. And those are a couple of my chairs that I inherited from my grandmother. There was a family, the McAdams family, that made baskets. And do you remember Mary Ann Cole? She used to collect a lot of these McAdams at family baskets. Do ya? The Valentine Klein owned and operated this threshing machine. There's a picture of him and his threshing machine. Evidently, he'd go around to people's farms and help them bring in their crops. Some of the men logging in Scott Township. Trapping of fur, which was a way to supplement your income back in the day. That is a group of men down in Cold Friday area showing off all the things they had caught. Once again, that's another picture of the Rothrock Mill. George Lowe operated a little boat. It delivered groceries and took people up and down the Ohio River between Leavenworth, Brandenburg, and New Amsterdam. There was a number of people that were involved in burning lime. That's an old lime kiln that was discovered. It had eroded out of the Ohio River bank. Moonshining was a big activity. This guy here, Joe Hamill, he was probably the most notorious moonshiner down in Scott Township. He absolutely refused to leave his farm. They had to finally condemn it. He just would not leave.
I had a little poem there, you know, it said, when it's springtime up at Flocky's, the little house against the hill, we'll have a drink of moonshine from good Joe Hannell's still.
And that's the famous Hannell Spring, where he got his spring water from. And it's down there near Horseman's Hideaway, if you've ever been down to Forestry. They identify it as Hannell Spring. The Blue River Inn. The Blue River Inn, this is what it originally looked like back in 1896. That's William Rothrock sitting there, that old grandpa, with all his grandkids and some of his kids. And then this is later on when some people, what was his name?
Hagman,
Yeah, I can't.
Walter
Walter Hagner. Hagner. Walter Hagner took over and turned it into a restaurant and a secret cocktail lounge, and you could do a little gambling there. You could rent cabins, you could go fishing, you could go boating, and that's some of the signs advertising the Blue River Inn.
He's the one that took feedback in the back room.
Yes.
Hagner.
Walter Hagner, he did not have a liquor license, but there was this little secret room called the Coconut Room, where if you were somebody special, like the county prosecutor, you could go back there and get a drink. And this is a brochure for the Blue River Inn. Nestled amidst the hills of southern Indiana's scenic wonderland. And here is a menu from the Blue River Inn. I'm not sure what the date is, but a sirloin steak or a T-bone steak is only $5.98. Now, another restaurant that used to be in Old Scott Township was Sam Bretz's, the Hilltop Inn, and you remember that, Dave, the Hilltop Inn.
Yeah, it originally was Sam Brett's, and the post office was there from 39 to 55, 54.
54?
Then in 54, it went to Wyandotte Lake, and then in 57, Aunt Ruth started back up at the building there to go up to the cave.
Okay. Well, that's Vera Harper Montgomery standing there. She was a waitress at the Hilltop Inn. It's on top of Happy Shack Hill. There's a little turnoff there now, but that's the only way you'd know anything was ever there.
Kind of in the curve, is that where that was?
Pardon?
It's kind of in a little curve,
Yeah,
when you're coming from Leavenworth, it used to be on the right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
right at the top of the hill
Hill.
there, and
Okay.
Vera made it into a truck stop.
She made it into a truck stop?
And it did real well for quite a few years, because 62 was the main route. About 63, it moved over onto State Road 64 running through English. But before then, that was 460, it was a US highway, and she put a truck stop there at the top of the hill, did real well. That was Kenny Harper's daughter.
Mm-hmm. And a restaurant that's still in operation part of the time is the Idlewild Post restaurant at the entrance to the Harrison Crawford State Forest. Mary, what's Mary's last name?
Kittner.
Mary Kittner owned it and operated it for years, and then she recently died maybe 3 years ago, and her daughter is trying to get it going again. I'm not sure if she's gonna be successful. A little bit about the forestry itself. Originally, there was a huge emphasis on fire containment and prevention, and that's the original fire brigade that was tasked with trying to keep fires under control in the forestry. And of course, the fire tower was a big part of that whole effort. This was the original fire tower up at the Harrison Crawford State Forest. It was just made out of wood. And they built this final one back in 1937. Not sure exactly when. I got some of these slides out of order here. But this is the fires tower that is still standing up there. This picture was taken in the 1950s by Carl Rainbolt. It's kind of an infrared coloration. But you can see, if you see a picture of it today, like right here, how much the forestry has grown since then. And back in the olden days of fire containment, they used to have men actually manning the fire tower. This guy here was using a contraption known of as an Adelaide, and it was used to triangulate where a fire might be from the vantage point of the fire tower. This is what the forestry looked like back in the 1930s, before it was reforested. You can see from the fire tower, looking south, how there's like nothing there. It's just old, eroded, bare hillsides. This is shelter house number 2 up there at the end of the road as it goes down the Ohio River, sitting up on the riverbank. And that's shelter house number 2. Have any of you ever been up there for family picnics? It used to be a really big picnic place. There used to be an old sign up there, Indian Head sign in the parking lot, shelter house number 2. That's from the 1930s. Everybody that's been up at shelter house number 2 makes note of the Indian head carving that was done in 1936 in the floor. A lot of speculation as to who actually did that carving. Everybody tells you it was their uncle. This is a really beautiful watercolor that was done by Sue Chapman, one of Crawford County's best artists, of a family having a picnic up there on top of the hillside there at shelter house number 2. And this is James Best, who went on to play Roscoe P. Coltrane on the Dukes of Hazzard. That's him and his fiance up there at shelter house number 2 back in the 1950s. There used to be this little log cabin down there in the forestry. They referred to it as the Pioneer Cabin, and it was built in the 1830s. but it got in bad shape over the years. It was infested with a lot of copperheads when they tore it down. But there was this family here, it was the Daughtery family, that lived on a boat, fishing boat in Leavenworth, and when the flood of 37 came, they had to find a place to live, and they just moved into this cabin, and the forestry superintendent was such a nice, warm-hearted guy, he let them just live there. And the Great Depression and the Civilian Conservation Corps, the Harrison Crawford State Forest was one of the few forestries in Indiana that had an actual all-black Civilian Conservation Corps. It was the 517th, and there's some of the guys working on a road erosion project, laying rock, and I'm pretty sure this is the base of the road that goes up to Shelter House number 2. They had a camp in Carden. Originally, this is a picture of the camp. It was up near Cedar Hill Cemetery. And some of these forestry pictures here. This is entitled, "The First Logging in the Forest." A little bit of background about the original 1556 CCC. I won't go into that. There was also some of the Works Progress Administration men assigned to the forestry there. They all are quarrying rock down in the forestry to build roads back in the 30s. This is the picture that you all have here of Indiana's 517th CCC, all black Civilian Conservation Corps. And I can't tell you, doing research on this group of men, they did have a reunion in like 1950 or 1992. What a difference this made to these men's lives. A lot of them were from the western side of Louisville. They had nothing, and this gave them a chance to be able to make, I think it was $25 a month, and they were allowed to keep $5 of that and send $20 home to their families during the Depression. And they also were able to get their high school equivalency, their high school diploma, by belonging to the CCC. They also had classes, and that enabled a lot of these men to go on to have middle-class jobs. And then they were talking about what happened to their kids, and their kids oftentimes would go to college, and it just started this whole new trajectory in that family. And a lot of these men said that was the best time in their lives, the camaraderie and the hard work, and it just was really a positive experience for them. There's some of the barracks that were there for the CCC down the forestry. They got classes in first aid. That's a picture of them getting a first aid class. Here's a couple of the guys that worked as cooks at the mess hall. This is down at the Harrison Crawford State Forest. The kitchen force. There they are outside the mess hall down in the forestry. That's in 1934. Here we are, have a logging truck to enter into the, I think it's probably the Carden Parade on the 4th of July. Men in Barrack E. Norman Lee, barrack leader. There's a certificate, like the ones they could earn. This was Norman Lee's certificate for having completed a course in the instruction of Negro history. And they had a little newspaper called the Wyandotte Wahoo, and it's fascinating to read this. There's 2 copies up at the state library. I went up there to read them, and it's so funny, some of the stuff that's in these little newspapers. The service barn that was built in the forestry by the 517th, it's still standing. And once again, you can see how barren the land was before it was reclaimed and reforested back in the 30s. They also built at least 2 shelter houses. That's shelter house number 1, I believe, by the swimming pool. It's still standing. They also built the superintendent's home, really nice rustic little cottage that's still standing, still being used. Here they are working on the interior of the superintendent's home. The service building, it's still standing. That is the picture, I'm pretty sure I know, I showed you this earlier, I'm pretty sure I know where this is. I'm pretty sure that's at the base of the road that goes up to shelter house number 2. It's a pretty good sized hill, and this is that same rock wall, still standing today to prevent erosion. This is CCC was very successful in getting things done because it wasn't some wishy-washy program that says, let's go cut a few trees, let's go plant a few trees, let's go do. They had very specific amounts that they did each day. In one day, Percy Gardner, with a detail of 20 men, planted 400 trees. I mean, they kept count of everything they did. In a week's time, the men from Barrack E shoveled 7.7 cubic yards of dirt. And they would have contests about which was the most productive of the barracks, and they'd get prizes, I don't know, a carton of cigarettes, or I'm not sure what all they gave them. There's some of the white pine trees that were planted up at the forestry back in the 1930s. Unfortunately, white pine trees are not real long-lived, and a lot of those are dying now. Stone steps near where the flagpole area is, where the barracks were, those are still there. This was the recreation hall at the CCC camp with pool tables, etc. Some of the men getting ready to go on weekend leave. They went to New Albany and Jeffersonville to go to dances, and because New Albany and Jeffersonville actually had black ladies that they could have dates with or dance with, but not in Cardin. Cardin did not want any of these black people there, from what I understand. The CCC barracks were dismantled and moved to Camp Atterbury near Indianapolis for use during WW2 training. So they're no longer there, they have been rebuilt. That's the group campground, if any of you are interested. The group campground is where the CCC barracks once were. This is a reunion of the 517th All-Black Conservation Corps in 1960. So these guys kept in touch. They were really strong bonding experience going through this CCC experience together. This is Leif Klein. He was the first superintendent of the forestry back in 1933 to 1943. That's an old sign. Approaching the entrance of the Harrison County State Forest. It was just referred to as the Harrison County State Forest back then because there was not yet any land that had been purchased to add on from Crawford County. A number of little ponds were made throughout the forestry to provide water to wildlife. There must be at least 40 of these little ponds. I've showed you this slide already, just showing you once again how barren that land was before somebody started planting pine trees, etc. on it. And this is what the same land looks like today, looking south from the fire tower. This is just a beautiful picture of Greenbrier Knob looking north from the fire tower. That depressed area in between Greenbrier Knob and the hillside in the foreground, that is Fox Hollow, if you're wondering. There's a big horseman's hideaway activity there. A lot of horsemen like to go there. It's probably one of the few places you can take your horse near the Louisville area. Pine Lake on a beautiful fall day. That's up near the superintendent's office, I believe. The Nature Center is a lot of fun to go to, and they've rebuilt this famous hay press that came out of Leavenworth on the old coal property. And they keep these oxen there to demonstrate to people how the hay press once worked. Back in the 70s, Indiana state government evidently had some kind of extra money, and they hired all these guys
to go out and build trails and such in the Harrison Crawford State Forest. And a lot of these guys were a little bit, party guys, and not sure exactly how much work they got done, but they built this really impressive bridge across that's Potato Run. Unfortunately, it's where Potato Run gets backwater during a flood, and this bridge was built without any nails. They used wooden pegs, and it lasted for like maybe a season before it got swept away by the Ohio River, but it was very beautiful. The Post Oak Cedar Nature Preserve, which is a unique little ecological landscape with unique plants. The pool got rebuilt back in 2007. They have a really nice Class A electric campground up at the forestry. They've torn down all the old CCC barracks, and they have these really nice group campground up there. You can actually, there's a little chapel, you can get near it up there if you want. Some of the wildlife in the forestry, they've really seen an increase in bobcats over the last 20 years. The Indiana brown bat, everybody knows about. Timber rattlers. The endangered hellbender. Blue River is one of the few, if not only, streams in Indiana that can be able to support the hellbender because the water is clean and pure enough. Of course, deer. This is where, one of the few places probably that deer were originally released back in the 1930s, and now you can see what's happened. But this was the first season that the deer were actually hunted in 1951. Fox, coyotes, bluebirds, bald eagles, bobwhite quail, turkeys, some of the warblers like the worm-eating warbler, wood thrushes, river otters. I understand they're gonna let people start hunting river otters again. Spadefoot toads, which are kind of an endangered toad, they're down in the forestry. The eastern box turtle, there's some concern that their population is dwindling. A Luna moth, not very common to see one of those. There was a guy that worked up at the nature center I guess he worked at the pool, and he would collect all the bugs that went into the pool overnight. And he has this beautiful bug collection at the nature center. The alligator wood rat is endangered in Indiana, and the Harrison Crawford State Forest is one of the few places it still can be found. It likes to build little dens, and it's attracted to shiny objects, and it's a pack rat. It collects little bottle caps and pull tabs and such. And then they discovered this rare goldenrod along the shores of Blue River called Short's goldenrod, and nobody's allowed to know where this is because it's such a rare goldenrod. And I think this is my last slide. Everybody be sure to get out and enjoy the Harrison Crawford State Forest this summer. Do some really good, fun summer stuff. And that's it.
Thank you very much.